Hello everyone and welcome back to Video Editing 1 with Professor Harris. Today we're going through Lesson 4, Quick Editing Tools. This is the MC110 book. In MC101 though, you learned several fundamental editing tools including the splice in, overwrite, lift, and extract functions. And you briefly explored traditional three-point editing techniques. While these tools work best when carefully creating a scene, sometimes you'll want to build a scene or program quickly. Media Composer includes tools for this as well. In this lesson, you'll learn tools and techniques for quickly assembling and cutting down a sequence, but first you'll review how to customize your interface and keyboard settings to further speed up your editing process. Again, if you're not constantly improving, not constantly changing the interface, you're not moving forward as an editor. Let's look at the goals for this lesson. We've got create a new user profile, customize user settings, remap your keyboard, storyboard a montage sequence, add notes to clips or sequences, quickly cut down sequence content, adjust edit point timing, and create a string out sequence. Let's get into it. Creating and managing user profiles. One way to speed up the editing process in Media Composer is to tailor the settings to your work style and project needs. That's why we're reviewing how to set up your user profile and customize settings before we explore these quick editing techniques. You've already adjusted settings tied to your active user profile, for example, the import and workspace settings in the MC101 course. When you create your own user profile, you can back it up, load it into another system, or reload it on a shared system if another user, quote-unquote, borrowed yours. If you've been working with Media Composer consistently, you may have implemented some of the settings we covered in the MC101 course, or you may have an idea of how you'd like to customize your interface and keyboard. This is regardless of how often you've been working in Media Composer. And also, as your experience evolves, so should your interface, like I said many times before. All right, creating user profiles. In this section, you'll review how to create user profiles, then look at how and when to export, import, and update your profile. You'll also learn how to quickly access your profiles at the operating system level for management purposes. The MC101 course covered two options for creating a new user profile. Do you remember them? I'll give you a hint. One of them is right in front of your face here on my screen. First, we can create user profiles in the Select Project window. So right here, we could hit the User Profile dropdown, and we do Create New User Profile, or Create User Profile, excuse me. We could also import and reveal user profiles, but I'm going to leave it here on B. Harris. And I have to open this project to show you the second way. The second way that we can create user profiles is by accessing the settings. So we could go to File Settings like this, or we could use the keyboard shortcut, which you should be using, which is Command Shift equals, and that'll pull it up as well. That's Control Shift equal on Windows. And then you're going to tab over to the users, and then here in users, right at the top under user profile, you can click this drop down, and we can switch between the profiles that are saved on this computer, or we could import, reveal, and all the other options here. Awesome. All right, now Media Composer adds your new profile to the User Profile menu in both the User Settings tab and the Select Project window when you create a new one. You can access available profiles in either location as well. So if I had multiples, we see I have Benjamin Harris, I also have B. Harris. So I could switch between both of these. We saw that in the Select Project window as well. Exporting and importing a user profile. If you work on multiple Media Composer systems, for example, a classroom, a home system, or a work system, you'll likely want to copy your settings and move them to the different editing systems as your workspace is evolving. At a minimum, you'll want to create a backup, so you're always going to want to have a backup just in case you lose your primary. To do this, you'll use the export and import functions in the user profile menu. So exporting saves your user profile to a drive as a backup for easy transport to another system. To export your user profile, we're going to load up here in our settings. We're going to go to our user tab, and then we're going to click this little drop down. And here in the drop down, we have the export user profile button here, and then we can just click that, and then it's going to pull up our user profile little dialog window here. In the export user profile dialog box, we're going to click the folder icon in the location section and navigate to your external drive. So we're going to click this little folder icon, and then it's going to show us where we can actually, I can't move this one, there we go. Now we can pick a location for where this is going to export. I'm going to export mine to my desktop just for simplicity's sake, and then I'm just going to hit, oh, I should probably select a folder. I'll do, I don't know what to do. Let me make a new folder. So annoying the way you rename on Mac. Example. All right. Now I have a new folder. Now I can select that folder and hit open, and then it's going to save it there. What is this? Why did it open a second one? Maybe because I was spam clicking it. And then all we have to do is activate the standard option in the local user profile non-shared section and click OK. So we could select standard and then hit OK, and then it's going to tell us to select a directory even though I just selected one. Desktop example open. Okay, now it's directing. Okay, I hit OK, and boom, we're going to see that route to our desktop. So now when I open this here, you can see we have my user profile. These are the settings to my user profile. And if I right click on this and get info on it, it's going to be tiny. Your iPhone takes pictures that are 7 megabytes large. This is 3.7. So this is very, very small in comparison, which is great for obviously transfer. I could have a super customized interface. I could throw this folder into an email, send it to myself, or send it to a friend, and then I could just drive somewhere or change locations and just drag this folder out and slap it wherever I need to. All right, let's get back into Avid though, because Media Composer saves your user profile as a folder to an external drive location so you can import it into a new system or restore your user profile if needed. A couple of notes about exporting though. Firstly, you can wait to export your user profile until after you set up the core user settings you use regularly. So you're going to want to set up your interface, your keyboard, your workspace settings. You're going to customize all that, and then you would export, obviously. You want a customized interface. You don't want a basic interface. I have my interface semi-customized right now. I have other saves on other computers where it is much more customized. But to keep things basic and straightforward for you, my students, I want it to look pretty default, and I want to be working with you with kind of the default interface so you can just learn it on a 101 level. Okay, second thing to note is if you're working on a system connected to the Avid Nexus, ask your system administrator which of the two shared user profile type options you should use. So you need to make sure that you're staying in accordance with where you're working. Okay, as you may have guessed, if you move another Media Composer system, if you move to another Media Composer system, you use the import option to add your exported user profile to it. You can do this in either the Select Project window, so remember we were at the beginning, we were in the Select Project window. We can also do it here in our User Settings tab. To import our user profile, we can click the User Profile drop-down menu here again in the User Settings, and we can click Import User or User Profile. And then we're going to see a little directory. These are my, this is on my internal files of my Avid stuff. We can see I've got my Benjamin Harris one, settings, Avid, fatal error reports, but I can navigate back to my desktop, find my B Harris, and hit open, and then it's going to say that already exists because I'm already editing with that B Harris profile. But you could export and rename, and then that way you wouldn't have that problem. But anyway, so it's that simple to import profiles once you move to another system. In addition, you'll use the import feature if you want to restore a saved backup. This involves a couple of additional steps, including an opportunity to use the Reveal User Profile feature. So to reveal user profile, you're going to click the User Profile menu in the Settings tab here, and then we can just hit Reveal User Profile. So then it's going to take us to where this B Harris profile is actually stored, and we can see it is here. It doesn't actually tell me based off this view, but at least I have access to these, so I could drag these somewhere that I'd like to see them somewhere different. But I can see on the operating system, so I could just copy this information, again, shoot it in an email to a buddy or a friend or myself, and then access that again later. So that's the Reveal User Profile. As you can see on my screen, we reveal the profile. With the reveal profile command, it reveals and highlights the current user profile folder at the operating system level. If you want to restore a saved user profile, you can. You'll just want to delete the current version. So here's how we would do that. I'm going to delete my current version. We'll do that. And now it's gone. My Benjamin Harris profile. And now when I that's not what I want to do. Now when I import, I can import a user profile. I can import a user profile. What's going on? Excuse me, sir. Your program is buggy. File, settings, import user. I probably shouldn't have deleted that. Why don't I go to my operating system level and hit Command Z a few times? Okay, looks like I might be good. We'll try and import this from my untitled folder now. Import user profile. Go to desktop, untitled, B Harris, open. Okay. I guess it reappeared. It's magic. Wow. And that's how you would do it. I'm going to hit Command S so I can save that. But what was I saying? In the User Settings tab, we choose the different user profiles in the User Profile menu, meaning to ensure that the profile we replace isn't active. So we could select, I could switch to Benjamin Harris from B Harris, and then I could Command-Shift equals. I could re-import that B Harris profile. So you're not supposed to be on the profile when you re-import it. Excuse me, that was probably what I messed up earlier. Cool. All right, let's move on to the next topic. And that's going to be updating user profiles. The Update User Profiles feature updates your user settings when you upgrade to a new version of Media Composer. You'll want to do this for most updates. If you're upgrading to a version with substantial interface and feature updates, for example, from 2019.12 to 2021.12, recreate your user profile from scratch. That's probably going to be the best thing to do. And that can be obnoxious, especially if you have highly customized interface settings. But to get access to all the new features and not be locking yourself away from those, you're definitely going to want to do that refresh. But to update your user profile, if you're going from smaller update to smaller update, you're going to open the settings window like we have here. We'll tab over to user, and then all you have to do is make sure that you're selected on a profile. You can click it, and then all you have to do is come down here to update user profile, and it's going to run that update. No settings were added to your user profile because this profile is on, and my other one are on the most updated versions of Avid Media Composer. So if I click this, it's probably, yep, it's going to give me the same error message again. Any new features will appear when you open the updated settings in your user tab. Once you create a user profile, you're ready to customize those settings. All right, let's keep moving. Customizing user settings. As mentioned earlier, you can boost your editing speed by tailoring your user settings to your user style and project needs. The next several subsections can serve as a quick reference. It includes tables of commonly adjusted user settings and covers how to change select settings. Let's start with a roundup of commonly adjusted user settings and options you might adjust. A quick note here from Avid though, any settings we cover in this course contains a lesson reference. In parentheses, any settings we cover in detail in MC110 includes an asterisk before it. So that's a quick convention from the book if you have the book in front of you and you're following alongside me. All right. I'm going to show you a table now, and this table lists the common user setting adjustments. Let's pull that up. And here's what that chart looks like. I've used a lot of these myself to customize my interface. So give yourself a second to look this over and figure out what adjustments you want to make to your interface going forward. All right, let's discuss some of the settings now in this chart here. I'm just going to shrink this for now. But for your reference to access any of those user settings discussed in that table, you're going to go to File, and then you can go to Settings. Oh, sorry, you're going to make sure you're selected on Media Composer. File and Settings, or you could do that Command-Shift equals or Control-Shift equals. And then in the settings list, you can select your user. Make sure you're selected on your user profile. If you're editing someone else's, you're wasting your time, so make sure you're selected on your own. And then again, with these different settings, all you have to do is double click them. So if we're looking to do our controller settings, if we're looking to do our effect editor, we can just double click these settings, and that's how you would access them. So that's a just quick thing that you should keep in mind when you're trying to make these adjustments across all of your settings on your user profile, and really anywhere else too. All right, bin settings. Let's move to bin settings, and that would be frame view and the color options that you have in frame view. In lesson 3, you worked with bin views and column options. If you assign color to a clip in text view, you can control whether it appears as color bordered in frame view. You can do this by turning on and off the show border color options in the bin settings frame view. So if we go to the bin setting, and then down here in the frame view, we can see those different color settings and options. So we could set the frame view to use clip color, and we're going to see that change. This is on by default. That was something that was set in the 2021.9 and later versions. It's off in the 2021.6 and earlier versions, so you're not going to see those colors appear. But there are a lot of color options when it comes to working in your bins, and we can get into those later. All right, interface. Let's look at the bins tab now. During lesson 1 through lesson 3, you opened several bins as you created them and used them during an exercise. Limited screen space can shrink and your open tabs considerably. So if we've got a bunch of bins open, things start to get crowded, and we can see that we can't even read this anymore. So there are options to change this. To quickly identify open bins, you can color code them if we wanted to, and if you prefer to keep a neutral gray background, you can apply the color to the bins tab only. So here's how we would add color to our bins. We can open the interface settings and activate the bins tab. So we'll go to settings, and then we'll go to interface in here. We'll double click interface, and then in the interface settings, we can select the color settings. Ensure allow custom bin backgrounds is enabled. So we're going to make sure that we're on our bins tab and that the custom bin backgrounds is enabled. And then we could start adjusting from there. All right, next we're going to right click an empty space in an open bin and then click the bins fast menu. Or we can click the bins fast menu, excuse me. We close this and this, and we'll right click, and or we can go to the bins fast menu. And then we're going to choose set background color and pick color. So we could do where's set background color, and we could choose a color. We could set a custom color. Let's try this navy blue. So now this is going to eternally be blue like that. It's a little bit hard contrast between our selected clips. So let me change that. Let's go dark green. Yeah, that's got good contrast with the blue. So yeah, and then we can see that the tab appears this nice blue now. We can also go to other tabs, and then we can change these tabs as well. We do something like a dark red. So now when I know I've got maybe I have 2 video bins, I know that these are the ones that I'm maining, or these are my bad shots, and these are my good shots. We could do it that way as well. And then to save all this stuff, you just hit Command S, and that would save it. If you wanted to save everything, though, you would select in the bin container sidebar and hit Command S, and that would save the whole project for your reference. The selected color appears in the bin and the tab, but depending on your interface settings, you could set it to just be the tab or just be inside the bin. All right, interface general tab. Let's go to that now. Command Shift equals, and then we're here, and we'll go to the interface, and then under general, here we are in the general tab. Media Composer 2021.3 introduced a major change to workspace behaviors that you can control through the interface settings. Let's look at an example to illustrate this. Let's say you adjust panel size with the Edit workspace active and open the Audio tool. Then you switch to the Effects workspace and do some effects work, and then return to the Edit workspace. Media Composer calls up the Edit workspace with the panel sizing intact and the Audio tool open by default. this can be helpful if you're trying to, return back to our workflow. So let's do that now. We can do that exactly what they just said. We could open really any tool. I'll open the audio EQ tool. I've got it as a floating window. Excuse me, come here. I've got it as a floating window. I've got it over here. And then I could switch to my effects workspace. I could do a bunch of work in my effects and then come back to my edit workspace. And this is going to reappear right there as such. If you accidentally close the timeline window, switch to another workspace, and then switch back to your edit workspace, Media Composer returns to the same layout without the timeline by default. In this case, it might be nice to return to a layout that includes the timeline. So if we do a big oopsie poopsie here, close our timeline, switch to our effects, come back to our edit, and our timeline is still gone, there's a way to save this. To return to the default workspace setup we were using last, we could revert to our last saved workspace setup, and you could do one of the two things. First, we could Alt-Option click the workspace in the workspace sidebar to return to the last saved workspace. So I could just Alt-Option click this, and that's going to go back to my timeline. Or, let me close this, or I could just hit this little side arrow, and then I could do Restore Current to Default, or we could Restore to Saved. That would do it as well. And then there's one more thing we could do. In the Interface Settings General tab, we can change when moving to a workspace option to load the last saved state. So let's do that. Let's open our settings. We'll go to Settings. We'll go to Interface. And then in General, we're going to look for last known state when moving. When moving to a workspace, we can set it to last known state, or we can set it to last saved state, and that's going to again refresh that one where it had the timeline. So we can customize this. We have options. I like mine as load the last known state because I may have, so let's say the audio mixer tool open or the audio EQ tool or whatever it may be, and I want that open when I switch from audio and then I go back to edit. I want that to still be there when I get back. Again, this is all kind of just user preferences. You may not you may not know which option you prefer at this moment, and you will likely discover your preferences during the effects lesson. In fact, you ran into this decision when working with the effects workspace in the MC110 course. So you're going to have these dilemmas. Do I want it to do this? Do I want it to do that? Just keep in mind that it is an option. These settings that you have options with these settings to be customizing your interface. Media Composer just wants you to be aware that they're there so that you're not a ding-dong and moving on and struggling. By the way, workspaces are user settings, obviously, and you can find them listed in the workspace views in your user settings tab. So we could be working with that. Let's talk now a little bit more about workspaces, though. As you've experienced during the MC101 course and in this course, you can customize each workspace and save them by clicking the active workspace menu icon and selecting Save Current. So if I wanted this to be mounted at the bottom for some reason of my workspace here, I could just select my edit workspace and I could do Save Current, and that would save this cursed workspace. We don't want that there though. And then it would be saved to my user profile, obviously. Common adjustments that get saved to your workspace include panel size adjustments, docked tools, tabbed tools, and floating bins. So let's look first at panel size adjustment. That's really just adjusting the size of these things. So if I wanted a little bit more view, if I wanted to see my composer window my composer window, my source and record monitors a little bit better, I could adjust that, and that's saved automatically to my user settings. Then we have docked tools. So let's say I open the audio mixer tool. If I wanted to dock this tool to the bottom of my bin container window, I could do that. And then I have this tool docked, and that's a commonly saved option. A lot of people also do the audio tool as well. And then tabbed tools. We could drag a tool's vertical title bar, example the markers tool, over a panel and hold Alt or Option to drop it. So let's do this. I could do Alt or Option here, and I could change it here. So now it's one of my tabbed tools on this bin container. So it's the audio mixer is with my bins and my effects palette up here. So that's another option. And then floating bins, that's just when you want to have your bin open as a floating window. So if I hold Command or Control and double click a bin that's not open, it's going to open as a floating window, and then we can move this floating window anywhere we want. Let's say you were working on a 2-monitor display. You might have this whole bin on that second display somewhere, so that you're not accidentally accessing those files unintentionally. So yeah, those are some common ways to do that. Quick note, to quickly open floating bins, again, you can just hold Command and double click the bin that's closed, and it will open as its own floating window. Awesome. All right, Composer, the window tab. Let's move on. Do you remember how to add a second row of buttons to the Composer window? You did this in the MC110 course. You want to call up the second row of buttons if you plan on using buttons instead of the keyboard to perform functions. So if we wanted a second row of buttons like we have here in our Composer window, we could do that. But I highly recommend, and I'm sure other editors highly recommend, familiarizing yourself with keyboard shortcuts on your computer. It is always going to be fastest if you have that muscle memory to be performing functions rather than moving around with your cursor and clicking things. Now, that's not to say that this isn't quick, but if my hands are already on my keyboard and I just want to call up the settings menu really quick, boom, I'm in the settings menu. Rather than coming up here, going to File, and then scrolling down to Settings. You guys see me oftentimes, I'm always going, where is the audio tool? There it is. But you can have it mapped, and so I have these things mapped. So I'm constantly opening different windows, I'm opening different settings, and I can do that very quickly just from my keyboard. So these things should be ingrained in you. They should become part of your nervous system as you keep working in Avid. All right, that's enough of that. Let's get back into adding extra toolbars and things in our Composer window. So we're going to go up to Windows first, and then we're going to go to Composer Settings. Additionally, you could just hit Command equal symbol, and then making sure we're tabbed on Windows, we could select Always Display 2 rows of data. This is going to put 2 rows of data up here in the top of our Composer window, and then in this second area, Button Displays at bottom, we can hit 2 rows. And then all we have to do now is hit OK. We can see those 2 rows appear of data in the top, and we can see an extra row here appears at the bottom of our Composer window. Now we have access to those extra buttons. As you discovered in MC101 course, regardless of your Composer setting preferences, you'll want to map functions to the interface and or keyboard. Let's review and expand on how to do this. Quick note though, for comparison, listed in Media Composer settings, you can go to Settings subsection in the editing guide inside the online help, and you can see a bunch of facts about settings there. All right, let's review mapping and keyboarding, mapping to the keyboard and interface buttons. So during the MC101 course, you mapped functions listed in the command palette to the interface buttons or keys on the keyboard palette. If you plan to work with an assistant editor or editor, you'll want to follow seasoned pros and add your frequently used features and commands to your keyboard. This adds speed and efficiency to the editing process. Do you recall how to access the command palette and map functions to your interface or keyboard? Just in case, let's do a quick review here. So to map command palette functions, first you're going to want to do is you're going to open the keyboard settings. So we're going to go to File, and then in Settings, we can go to User, and under User, we can find Keyboard, and we can double click that. Or open that, we can double click our whichever one we plan on editing. So now you got your keyboard palette open. Next, you're going to open the command palette, and we can either go to Tools, Command Palette, or we can hit Command 3 or Control 3, and that's going to open the command palette quickly in our menu here. Next, in the command palette, we're going to ensure that button-to-button reassignment has been checked. This is going to allow us to map buttons to functions. That includes functions on our keyboard. And then we're going to drag and drop the function buttons to the tab in the command palette, to an interface button, or to a key on our keyboard. So we've got options of how we're going to map certain functions. So we can put edit buttons, FX buttons, trim buttons, anything really onto our keyboard. Now if we're selected on the keyboard and we hold shift, it's going to show us a second layer of the keyboard. This is a quick tip, so if you wanted to add a modifier, so let's say hitting shift 0, I could set this to, let's see, I could make shift 0, we'll just make shift 0 like a playback loop. So I'll hold shift, and then what I can do is click and drag, and I can drag this button now to my keyboard. And now if I hit shift 0 while I have a segment loaded in my source monitor or my timeline and a region selected, it's going to play that in and out region. So that's a pretty basic 1-2 on mapping functions to your keyboard. We could also click an interface button or key on the keyboard palette, and then we can navigate to a menu and select the command to map, for example. We could set this to the menu to button reassignment, and then we could select a button. So let's say we wanted to make, we could go to Tools and then Audio Mixer, and now we have Audio Mixer selected, and with the Audio Mixer we could select a button that this would be mapped to. So I could pick, let's say, F1, and let's see, Tools, Audio Mixer again, and then now it's mapped to my F1. So with button, you would select, I flipped that by accident. You'd select the menu to button reassignment. You would select the button that you want to modify, and then you could route to a command or a tool, whatever it may be, in your settings up here, and then you could map things. So that's a quick refresher on button to button reassignment and menu to button reassignment. Additionally, let me close my keyboard here really quickly. Let's make it so that I can at least see my my second palette of buttons that I made here. So we've got our second row of buttons. If I wanted to, I could also map buttons here. So there's blank spaces here. There's a few blank spaces there. I could add, I can add the motion effects editor. I got to make sure it's on button to button reassignment. I could add the motion effects editor, the quick transitions menu. I could add it to any one of these places by simply clicking it and then dragging to an available space. But I'm going to refrain from that because I like what I have here. Okay, cool. Okay, you now successfully mapped some menu commands with initials. We also mapped some buttons to our keyboards. As we map functions or commands to our keyboard or our interface, we need to keep the following in mind, though. And the first is when mapping to keyboard, you can hold shift, like I said, and you can see a second layer. So that's going to activate kind of hotkeys. So you can do shift Y, shift F, shift, really any key, and that modifier set will be the way to access that button. Second thing is with button to button reassignment, active, you can drag an existing interface button or key on a keyboard palette to a new location to rearrange mapping functions. For example, we could move the lift and overwrite tool from Shift A to Shift Z, so we could be remapping those functions. Let me pull up that keyboard again, file settings, so we can see what we're looking at while I talk about it. Awesome. Shrink that. So I could just be rearranging these buttons if I wanted to. I could drag this and put it there, but I don't want to do that. I want to keep it default right now. And then number 3, if you're more familiar with the bin fast menu than the drop-down menus, you can save time by mapping directly from that menu to your keyboard. So if we're working with our bins, not our audio mixer, let's close that. We'll go to our bins. Let's say we're working with clips. Let's say we wanted to do quick functions in our bins, like duplicate or whatever. We could set those functions, or from our fast menu, we could set those functions from our fast menu here. For example, reveal file. We could set the reveal file command to, like, I don't know, F8 on our keyboard, and then it's going to quickly pull up where this file is actually linking from or located as far as the MXF folders. Another thing to note is if you plan on using the keyboard as much as possible, you might run out of keys. So consider duplicating the keyboard settings. So you could do this with Control D or Command D on Mac to create a role-based playouts for editing, effects, color creation, etc. So, in addition to mapping buttons to the Composer window and the timeline palette, you can remap the buttons in the toolbar at the bottom of the timeline. So we could be rearranging these buttons to fit our preferences. Cool. Since button-to-button reassignment mode disables all interfacing keyboard function, close the command palette when you're finished mapping. Otherwise, you're not going to get functions on these buttons back again, especially with button-to-button reassignment selected. If you want to try out a function before mapping it, you can select the active palette button here, and then this activates, these buttons work in real time. So let's say I had a clip loaded into my source monitor. let's say I had a clip in my time. Okay, all right, hold on. I need to think about this. If I wanted to, I could use these buttons as if they were actually functioning within Media Composer. We talked about this in 101, but we're going to talk about this again. So let's say I wanted to add a motion effect to this clip that I've loaded in my source monitor. I could click this button and it's going to pull up that motion effects window. So it works as if these buttons were mapped directly on my toolbar. It's like a second set of tools, and I don't really know anyone who uses this, like who uses the active palette, other than to see what kind of functions they might want to map to their keyboard. So Avid Media Composer's keeping our heads up on that one. Quick attention to Mac operating system users. If you want to map Media Composer options to the function keys, we can go to the Apple menu, System Preferences, Keyboard, and then select either use all F1, 2, etc. keys as standard function keys checkbox, and then the touch bar will show those F1 through whatever if you're using a MacBook Pro that has the touch bar. I am using a MacBook Pro that has the touch bar, but I have mine set so if I push the function key or FN key in the far bottom left corner of my keyboard, all those buttons appear automatically, so I don't have to worry about doing that extra step. All right. With practice, mapping functions and commands becomes intuitive. However, what to map and where can feel overwhelming at this point. So to start, map functions that you use frequently that aren't mapped already. So that's a really good rule of thumb. Just if you're not sure what to map, just if you find yourself using the quick transition button, you keep coming up here and clicking it. Maybe figure out how to get it so you park your position indicator and you hit something on your keyboard. I already know that right underneath your backspace key, that forward slash, that is that is the quick transitions by default. But maybe you want to use another key for that. Just customize it. Customize your interface and keep working with it. All right, during the next exercise, we're going to map features that you'll use in class but aren't found in the default Media Composer interface or keyboard. And you'll map additional common functions to the menu commands. So we'll do that. You can do that in the exercise of the book. All right, more notes on keyboard mapping strategies. Most editors develop their own keyboard mapping strategies. Some slightly modify the default layout, while others completely rearrange it. And editors who first learn on different NLEs might remap their buttons and keys on their keyboard to mirror that system's layout. So let's say if you came from Premiere Pro or Sony Vegas or whatever you came from, you might want to map your buttons in Avid to be more similar. In other words, keyboard mapping is personal, obviously. There's no right or wrong way to do it, although I do feel like there are probably best practices, and it would be good for you to maybe Google around, look up some YouTube videos, see what other professional editors are doing, what are they mapping, and see if that makes sense for you. If it doesn't, then don't do it. You don't have to force yourself to follow someone else's path. So as you decide how to map your keyboard, consider the following approaches. Map keys into functional groups. You're also going to want to map functions based on letter, numeric. For example, mapping the mark in and out functions to the I and O keys is something that would be intuitive. The default Media Composer keyboard map includes both, but follows the first approach overall. For example, the keyboard's left side contains a group of marking and editing functions. Again, that's more intuitive. Above all else, you'll want to create an easy-to-remember keyboard mapping strategy. If it isn't, change it. Would it help to see sample keyboard layouts? Probably. So again, you can look up maybe some of your favorite editors, see how they edit. But also, there's Avid includes a link in the book on this under page 105 that you can look at as far as different keyboard options. Cool. All right, let's wrap up this section with a couple of mapping quick references. So first we have a table listing common functions found in the command palette tabs and drop-down menus, and second is a screenshot of the default keyboard palette. So let's close these and we'll minimize this, and then we can see all that. So here we are. The following tabs list common functions and commands to map. So take a second to study this. And then we've got the default keyboard. So this is the default keyboard layout. If you ever get confused or you accidentally mess up the save for the default keyboard, this is what it looks like by default, and then if you hold shift as a modifier, this is that second layer. Some editing systems allow you to have even up to five different keyboards with different modifier keys that you could hold, but Media Composer has two. We have the first, and we have the holding shift or whatever it may be to modify and get that second one. So, all right, for your reference, there you are. Throughout the rest of this course, Media Composer is going to keep reminding you, and I'm going to keep reminding you to use the keyboard as much as possible, especially during the exercises, and to challenge yourself to release the mouse, right? Let go of the mouse and use your keyboard functions. All right, let's move on now to editing from the bin. Traditional workflow of loading each clip into the source monitor before cutting it into a sequence is common. However, Media Composer offers several ways to skip the source monitor and edit directly from a bin to the sequence. This course looks at two bin editing methods: editing from frame view to create a storyboard edit, and editing from text view to create a string out sequence. Let's get into that. All right, first we're going to get into storyboard editing. Storyboarding is a powerful method for visualizing scenes or entire films. In Media Composer, you can use the storyboard editing to visualize and quickly assemble scenes. This works well for montages or scenes with little dialogue, for example, action sequences or news packages of a reporter or anchor with voiceover. In the next exercise, you'll use this method to quickly build a video montage set to music. To prepare your storyboard edit, we're going to open a source bin and activate frame view. So we've got a bin open, we'll activate frame view, and now we can see all our beautiful frames. Now, optionally, we can use a specific portion of a clip by playing the clip in the bin and use the keyboard to set in and out marks. This only works during playback, but what we could do is select a clip, then hit spacebar on a keyboard. It's going to play. We could set an in, we could set an out. So we could be using this. Now when I load it in the source monitor, we can see that in and out are set. But we could be doing that quickly here in our source bin. So the bin that we're going to be using is our source for this script edit. Now we're going to arrange the clips in the bin from left to right, top to bottom in the order that we want them. So we can rearrange all of this and move bins lower, adjust the positions, and this can get really crazy and really messy. So there are a few things that can help you stay organized. So you can use the grid to speed up clip alignment. To do this, we can go to the bin's fast menu right here, and we can right click an empty space, and then we can select snap to grid. Where is that at? Where's that at? Align or snap to grid, and then we can do enable. And then once we hit enable, it's going to allow us to have a grid. And once we start moving these around, we can see they're snapping nicely into framed areas. And so it's going to read this again, left to right, top to bottom, and whatever orientation that we put this in is how it's going to read when we bring it into our timeline. Additionally, we have invisible. To enable the grid without displaying the grid pattern, we could do that setting as well. So if we come down here to snap to, we could make it invisible, and then that's going to still have the grid, but it's going to make it invisible. So we can still see it snapping around as I move it. All right, sweet. Those are just some preferences if you'd like. Also, we're going to drag and drop clips to build the storyboard. Clips snap to the nearest grid, obviously. But we can be selecting clip, hitting the space bar.
All right, is everybody ready?
It's going to play too, and then we can find a significant frame when we hit the space bar again to use as a representative frame. So when we're building our edit here, we can be assured that we're looking at the correct clip, or that we're using the media that we mean to when we're arranging this. Okay, a couple of quick tips here. The first one being to see more clips at once in your bin, we can use Control K or Command K, and this is going to decrease the thumbnail size. So if we can't quite see everything in our bin, we can hit Command K until it zooms all the way out. Now we have a view of every single bin. We can also use Control or Command L, and that'll make them larger, so if we needed to see it a little bit closer. Additionally, you could make it fairly large, and then you could just drag out these handles just for now, and keep working and making it as big as you need to. We could also, and this isn't something that's discussed, but I'm going to discuss this. Let's say we had it set like this, but we see this part of this clip and then we don't see this clip at all. What you could do is you could come down to your settings and you could do align and fill, and then you could do fill window. And then when we do fill window, it's going to keep them within the window border. So there's no extra clips being drug off to the side here. So if I drag this back over, now we can rearrange these clips in a way that makes a little more sense, that they're not kind of bleeding off the page here, that we can keep it all contained, self-contained. And then the last tip is that to change the visible head frame here in our different frame view, we can use the JKL keys. So if I hit K, we can see this starts to go through. And if I hit K, I can pause, and that'll be the new representative frame on that in the frame view there. Cool. All right, but let's talk about how to execute the storyboard edit for real. So once we've got this all, I would suggest, bringing it in, setting your marks, and then you've got your marks set in your clip, and then you've got your representative frame set, so you know which shot is which, and you've got it all organized and set up. Now it's time to actually execute that storyboard edit. So if the timeline is empty, we're going to go to the timeline, and we can create a new sequence by doing Control-Shift-End or Command-Shift-N. It's going to ask us where we want to put this sequence. We're going to do student lesson sequences. We'll hit OK, and then we're going to name the sequence. I'm just going to name it test, and we'll go from there. And then we'll load the sequence. Now that it's loaded in our timeline here, let's move on. So optionally, if we create music montage, we can drag an audio clip to the empty timeline track in the newly created sequence. So let's do that. Let's go to our music, and we could drag one of these into our timeline. Now we got our wet bread WAV. Why is it called that? Anyway, and then we can drag lasso around the clips in our bin. So we'll go back to our bin with our clips in it, our footage, and then we can drag lasso all these clips. Once we're satisfied with the order that they're in, we could select only a few of them if we wanted. I'm going to select all of them, or we could click the first one and then shift click the last one. That's going to select all in between. All right, and then we're going to drag those selected clips into the timeline window, and this is going to create a new sequence if we haven't created one already, but we have. So I'm going to just drag that, and then boom, we're going to see that get added, and now bam, we've got this whole sequence added up now, all our different shots and everything, and we are moving. It's arranged them in an order, and we could have set marks on every single one of these, and it's going to add those specific set marked time frames in between each shot. Now this is going to make a really long edit if you haven't gone in and set your ins and outs as far as each shot goes. So okay, no, don't want to load 58 shots into the source monitor. Make sure you don't do that once you have them all selected. Cool. This approach shows nonlinear editing's true potential, but it also introduces a potential pitfall. Unless you take the time to carefully mark each clip again while preparing your storyboard, you may build a sequence that's like way too long, like completely impractical. On the other hand, if you invest the time to mark your clips, you'll lose much of the speed and efficiency promised by storyboard editing. So there's a kind of a balance that you can strike there. I still suggest going through each clip, marking what you actually want, setting your in, setting your out, figuring out what it is you want from each shot, and then doing that big storyboard edit, rearranging your shots and then adding them to your timeline as such. All right, let's talk about creating a poster frame now. Have you wondered if or how to change the generic frame icon in the Select Project window? So if you have, then this is the little lesson area for you. Once you familiarize yourself with the project's contents or assemble a rough cut, you may discover a frame that represents your project perfectly. This is kind of like a representative thumbnail for a YouTube video. It communicates the theme of the whole video in a single frame. So there might be a shot, let's say for instance this shot really represents my whole project. This is exactly what I want to summarize my project as. So I can use this frame to represent my project when I'm in the Select Project window. To do this, we're going to park the position indicator over a representative frame in our source or record monitors, and then all we have to do is right click it, and then we can do the save as project poster frame. and that is way down here. That's the second to last object. So if I do that, now when I reload into my select project window, I'm going to have to save and then come back, but I'll show you what that looks like. And here we are now in the select project window, and we can see that that frame has been added. It's a rather silly looking frame. It looks like a frame or a clip from The Office when they're goofing around outside in that parkour episode. But, there we go. Rather than this generic, like, Avid logo, now we have this beautiful, beautiful frame that represents our project and encapsulates the theme. So once you build your storyboard, and you're going to want to make notes before you refine the sequences, markers can help you do this. Let's move now into markers and how to use them more efficiently. Markers are like sticky notes, except they're easier to keep track of and read. They are versatile, and you can use markers in any kind of clip or to a sequence, so you can be attaching them to both clips and sequences. Common uses for markers include marking good sound bites in an interview, providing the correct spelling for titles, identifying shots to use later, marking music cues or locations for sound effects, creating notes for producers, colorists, audio mixers, or the graphics artists, and also building a to-do/revision list directly in the timeline so we can go back and make those adjustments or bring things to attention that we need to. How else could you use markers? You worked with markers during the effects lesson in MC110 course. They identified which clips to add effects to, if you remember that lesson. All these reasons show why you would add marker buttons to your interface or keyboard during the mapping exercise. So let's look at how to use those markers you've mapped. To add a marker, we're going to open the clip or sequence that we're trying to add the marker to. We're going to park the position indicator on the frame that we'd like to add the marker to. So let's say there was a specific area in our timeline that we want to add a marker to. Let's say we want to fix this sunlight overexposure here. We could add a marker at this point to adjust the brightness. So now we have where we want to put it. We can also see the position here because this is linked. We can see that blue position indicator slides as well. So all right, we've got our point that we want to add our marker, and we can select the track that we'd like to add the marker to. So I can deselect my audio tracks and my TC1 track and just leave it here on my V1 track because it's essentially this clip. It's the video clip that I'm trying to make that adjustment to. Then we can click the Add Marker button in the source monitor, which is here, or which is going to add it to the source, not the record, or the one in the record monitor. This is what's actually going to add it here to our timeline. So I can go ahead and click it now. We could also, if we had it mapped to a button on our keyboard, we could click it there as well. And then optionally in the Edit Marker dialog box here, we can type out a comment or change, and then change the color of the marker to maybe bring attention to different things. So this red marker might be in, an effects note or a correction, a brightness correction. So we could type a little note here, fix brightness, and then we have that note for later. If we click the markers button here, we can see the marker window pops up. So now if we had a bunch of markers in our timeline, they would appear here as well. I can go ahead and back out of this. But before, let's find a new spot because I might have made a little mistake here. Let's add another marker here. And then here in the markers window, once we finish typing out what we want to adjust, let's say we could do ugly shot. So we don't want this shot. We could just hit OK, and that's going to add that marker. And now we can see the ugly shot marker appears, and it appears here in our timeline and here on the shot itself. So that's adding markers. The marker appears in the source monitor or record monitor's position bar and the timeline. So plus the first line and the comments appear at the bottom of the composer or timeline window. So as we hover over, like we just saw, or if I snap to the markers here, we can see that we get that note. I could do the same thing here in my source monitor. We could be adding markers here, same thing, blah, 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 blah. We can click OK, and then we can see that that marker appears on this clip now. Cool. Very awesome. It's a really, really powerful feature if you're using it correctly. If you add more than one marker to a source clip or sequence, it would be nice to see all the markers and their comments at once. You can, again, we can be working with the markers tool, and the way we could open the markers tool is we could come up here to tools, and then we could just scroll down to markers, and then our markers tool appears. We got our first marker here. If I double click it, I can snap to where this marker is. We're currently selected on the source monitor, So if I select to the record monitor, we can then see the markers that are in our record monitor. Awesome. Now, if I go to change color, this is where I can change the color of the marker. So for instance, red markers could be notes from the director, or you could make, let's say, blue markers. We make blue markers as effects or color adjustments, whatever it may be. You could also, I would recommend making green markers because effects are generally, before, if it's a real-time effect, it's going to be green. So we might say, oh, we want to add an effect here, and that's why I made a green marker. So develop a system for yourself, or discuss with your senior editor what system they might already use as far as markers go. But once you open this, you can treat the tool like a bin. For example, we can double-click, again, these headings in our columns, and we could add information to them. We could also read the information that's in them. Additionally, and I'm sure you saw this earlier, if I right-click within here, we've got all kinds of options. We could even select a marker and we could change the track that it's set to, or we could add it to other tracks. We could also import markers, export markers. We could print the markers. We could choose our columns, all kinds of stuff. Cool. So that's the markers tool, and let's keep moving. Efficiency tips now for refining an edit. As you review your sequence, it's tempting to make changes as you go or write down changes as you produce or direct points to them. Markers can help you focus and avoid mishaps. For example, one change might prompt you to think of another change earlier or later in the sequence. To stay focused, you can add markers to identify changes. If you move later or earlier to add another marker, you can quickly locate where you left off in your review. So if you've got your tool open and you're being color-coded, you could say, oh, I made a new change. You might mark that, and then, oh, I want to go back and make those other changes. So rather than breaking up your flow of continuing to edit where you're at, you could just jump back quickly, set some markers, and be like, oh, make this change in these two spots, and then you could have that as a note for later so that you can continue editing where you're at in your sequence. So again, you would go back and you could make those changes. But once you do make changes later, you're going to make sure that you delete. So once you make that change, once you end up going back and making the revisions, whatever it may be, make sure that you're deleting your markers. Make sure that your fellow editors are deleting their markers so you don't end up with random markers with random gibberish. So you can delete your markers by selecting them here and then hitting the delete key on your keyboard, and that's the fastest way to do it. As shown, markers can enhance your editing experience, but let's look at 3 useful tips. Number 1, quickly navigate to markers. To move to a marker, you could attempt to scrub through or click markers in your composer window or the position bar on your timeline, or you could use one of the following options to quickly navigate to markers. Let me switch to this so I actually have 2 markers to show. We can use the Go to Next marker or Go to Previous marker functions. Move tab in the command palette. So if we open the command palette, we could use those. Additionally, we could double-click a marker in the markers tools or tools marker. So if we open tools, we open the marker tool, we can just double-click and that's going to snap back and forth to those markers. Both methods work well. The double-click method works particularly well when you use markers to create a to-do list or a revision list in the timeline. You can pick which changes you want to make first. You can double-click the associated markers and make those changes and then remove the marker. So again, if we had a bunch of, let's say, effects adjustments, I had a bunch of green markers, I'd work through all those green markers, make those adjustments, delete the markers as I go, and then move on to the blue markers. And if I had a list, it was like green, blue, red, blue, blue, and it just was all the different colors. If I use colors correctly, then I can just be jumping to each color and be methodical about it that way. Before making changes to a sequence with to-do markers, duplicate it. Always make sure you're duplicating your sequences. So let's say I had a bunch of markers in my timeline. I did a rough cut edit, and then now I'm going to go back and I'm going to make those changes on all the markers that I set. Make sure we duplicate our sequence, because just in case we mess something up, or we decide that the previous version, the version that we had before we made color effects, edits, and adjustments, we don't like it. We could just move back to the old one that we were working with before. All right, and then delete markers. You can remove markers at a time in the source or record monitor. I already talked about this, but you can just go to the frame that contains the marker, and then you can hit backspace or delete. We could be doing this here in our timeline as well. So if I if I moved over here and I got to the actual frame that had it, I hit delete, that's going to delete the marker directly here in the timeline. So that's another quick note. And then the last note here is to add markers on the fly. What if you're figuring out where to place B-roll clips over voiceovers or montage clips over a music track? If you add markers while playing back the sequence, you can use pacing or rhythm to note clip placement. So if I didn't have a B-roll, I mean, this is a perfect example of not having B-roll. If I made a new track with Command Y and I had a V2 now, my B-roll or my cutaways, I could be watching this and looking for pacing and be like, well, this shot's a little long, or this interview clip's a little long. What I could do is have something in the background. I'd add a marker and be like B-roll. I could title that B-roll, and then I could go back, I could look through my clips, figure out which one I like most, and then add that as my B-roll shot. If we want to add markers on the fly, we're going to do the following. We're going to map one or more marker buttons to the keyboard palette, so we're actually mapping to our keyboard. We're going to play the clip or sequence and press the marker keys that appear when you stop in the playback. So we would just play through our clip, we'd find the point that we want to add the marker, and then we would hit the add marker button that you mapped on your keyboard, or you could just click it here. And then to view the list of markers again, we would go to Tools, Markers, and then to annotate the markers, we can type our comments into the marker tool comment column. So let's say you wanted to quickly run through your sequence, and while it's playing, you're going, pause, pause, add marker, and then you just color it blue, and then you keep moving, play through, pause, add another one, and then you can come back through and open your tool here, and then add comments specifically to why you might have added those markers there. I would recommend just going through one and being particular and thorough about it. So as soon as you pause, you set a marker, you say why you set that marker there, because then you're not going to forget. Cool. All right. You can also use the on-the-fly method to add scrolling markers. In other words, markers that note where to add sound effects or music stings. You'll do this in Lesson 7, so we're going to talk more about that. But let's wrap up this section with some additional notes about markers. If a marker exists in a portion of a source clip you edit to the timeline, the marker will appear in the timeline segment as well. So if I'm over here, let me move this out the way. If I got a clip here and I start adding all kinds of markers to it, this is still in the way. If I start adding all kinds of markers, add a marker at the beginning, blah, blah, blah. Add another marker here. Yeah. So now we got multiple markers. If I add this clip to my timeline now, yoink. Oh, we can barely see it. Let's zoom up here because our sequence is so long. It's going to have those markers in that clip as well. Oh, where'd they go? They should be there. Maybe I need to overwrite. Let's do an overwrite. Interesting. It's only adding it at the beginning. Is it just... Here, let's move this. What added the empty one? Oh, because I didn't set an in and out region. Let's try that. Set our in and our out region, and then we add it to our timeline. Yep, there we go. All right, now we can see those specific markers that I set. Okay, awesome. So you'd have to have a reference point inside your source clip. So setting your ins and outs before you add it to your timeline, that's what's going to include those markers when you do add it to your timeline. So keep that in mind. And again, you could be adding markers everywhere. You could be adding all kinds of different colored markers. You could be using markers just to establish which shots you like. You could also be using, again, that text view, and then adding quality. Remember I talked about that quality one, using the asterisks to dictate good, better, best. There's all kind of options. You can do many, many things. Some cameras, such as the Sony XD-Cam cameras, let you apply essence markers in the camera or through logging software. These markers appear marked in the clips as well. So if you're using third-party markers, specifically the Sony XD-Cams, you can also see those markers here when you bring your source clips in. So that's cool. You can mark a region of the sequence or clip rather than a single frame by adding spanned markers. To do this, we can set in and out marks and Alt or Option press the marker button on our key. So if I set an in oh, if I don't switch to trim mode here, give me a second. If I set in here, and I want to make sure I'm in, excuse me, thank you, out, and then I hold Alt or Option, I click this marker, and now it's added a marker to that region. More gibberish, okay? And we can see that marker appears strangely, but it's got this nice fat wide red line to dictate that this marked section is the entirety of this section. Cool. And then you can change which marker colors display during an edit phase by going to the Timelines Fast menu / Show Markers. So we can come down here to our Timelines Fast menu, we can select it, and then under here in Show Markers, we can see which colors we have set for our shown markers. Awesome. All right, let's move on now to cutting down a sequence with top and tail, a very important editing feature here in Avid Media Composer. Okay, buckle up and open your ears because we're getting into top and tail now. Avid Media Composer is going to want you to know this when you're taking their exams. The storyboard editing section introduced you to a reductive approach to storyboarding. Once you add roughly marked shots to a sequence, you can quickly extract excess footage with two one-step features called top and tail. That's why we encourage you, and Avid encourages you, to quickly create subclips during the last exercise. So you're creating quick subclips. They don't have to be perfect. You just have to get the gist of what you want from the shot in there, and then you're going to add that to your timeline. The top and tail functions let you use the position indicator, that's this guy, as a guide for performing quick edits to timeline segments down here. Specifically, you'll use the top function to extract footage from the start of our clip. This is the equivalent to pressing the T mark clip button in our keyboard, so we can hover over this shot. Here in my timeline, I can hit T, and it's going to set that in and out. It's going to automatically select this clip. The T key, and then using the mark out button over here, so I could move the position indicator and press O if I wanted to remove the beginning of this clip, and then hitting X on my keyboard to extract only this first section, and all the downstream content is going to snap shut. If I hit X, boom, we can see that closes. So this is essentially what the top function does. It eliminates the need to select the clip with this and then move the position indicator, set an out, and then hit the X key on our keyboard to extract that function. We could just simply hit the top button. And you'll use the tail function to extract footage from the position indicator to the end of the clip. This is the equivalent to pressing the T key on our keyboard and then moving near the end of our clip, pressing the I or in button, and then using extract to remove the end of our shot. And that way we're essentially trimming the top of the left side and the tail, and we can use the top and tail function to make that edit much faster. So you can see the potential time-saving function of this if we're just moving our position indicator around and then hitting our top edit and hitting our tail edits. We don't have to set all those marks. To prepare the timeline for top and tail edits, first we're going to select the tracks that we want to trim. So let's say I wanted this shot, I wanted him running already. I didn't want this awkward pause, nothing in it, and then him running. I want to start by the shot he's already sprinting. So we'll place a position indicator where we want to perform the top or tail edit. To extract the footage from the start of the segment to the position indicator, we can click the button or the key that we mapped to top. Now, this is where Avid Media Composer leaves you high and dry. So I'm not going to leave you high and dry. We're going to hit Command 3 or Control 3 on our keyboard to pull up the command palette, and then making sure that we're tabbed over in Edit and that we're selected on button-to-button reassignment, we're going to add those top and tail edit buttons to our timelines menu here. First, I'm going to make some adjustments. I'm going to move this to the right a little bit. I'm going to move my trim button to the right a little bit so I can make space for my top, which I'm going to now drag and drop here. That's the add edit button. It looks very similar, but this is the top button. I'm going to move the tail button just next to my top button. So now my top and my tail. Now you can tell the difference between the top and tail buttons because you've got this kind of like this is solid and this is scattered, which means it's removing that content. So that's the top because we're removing the top. Same thing with the tail. Scattered, solid, removing the tail. Again, that's the split edit button. And Avid's going to want to test you on whether or not you can identify the top and tail buttons. So you can keep that in mind moving forward. Okay, let's get back to doing our top edit. I'm going to close my command palette now, And again, I got my position indicator where I want him to be running full speed, and now all I have to do is hit the top edit button, and it's going to perform that top edit. It's going to remove, I don't know why it jumped my position in the timeline, but it removed this shot, so now we can see when we make this cut, it switches immediately to him sprinting. So we've made a very fast edit rather than having to select the clip and then blah, 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 and add our out by moving our position indicator where we want, out, and then hitting extract on our keyboard. We've eliminated all that, and now we can just, boom, we can hit our top edit. And same thing with our tail. We could, to perform a tail edit, let's say that marker there, that red marker there was something that I'd put because that's where I wanted my out to be for some reason. Maybe the director said, I want this shot to not be so stagnant. I want it to end here. We could park a position indicator right where we want it. Make sure that our proper tracks are selected. I forgot to mention that part. Make sure that your tracks are selected. Otherwise, it's going to remove content from other tracks, and you might not want that. And then all we have to do is hit our tail edit. And boom, we can see it removes that tail to that clip. Very, very useful. Very, very fast. Very good for dailies and quickly editing dailies. Awesome. Let's move on now to maintaining sync with the top and tail edit. So as you can imagine, this could cause problems. Anything with extract, again, remember anything with yellow tools, you should be thinking twice before you make an edit. Again, that's a little backwards. I think it should be red, but that's just a personal thing. So since top and tail extract material, you need to keep sync and track activation in mind. To avoid breaking sync with top and tail, enable the sync lock on all tracks that must stay in sync as follows. So you're going to make sure you got all your sync locks enabled if you want to make sure you're not breaking your sync. To maintain sync on select tracks, we can just click those specific tracks. So for instance, with this situation, we're just going to want to select our V1 and our A1 because that's really all that has that content on it. But let's say we had a music track. We kind of want our music track to just keep flowing. We don't need to enable the sync locks on that one. To maintain sync on all tracks, though, we could click the TC1 sync lock button, or we could press the sync lock on all tracks key that we've mapped to our keyboard. Thanks, Avid. So if we had this selected, that's going to automatically select everything. That's a fast way to do that. But again, we don't need the V2 and the A2 right now. Media Composer maintains sync by removing the same amount of material from all the sync locked tracks. So when we're making edits over here, we're removing stuff. Anything that we have selected with these sync locks, it's only going to remove material from those tracks. Media Composer maintains sync by, again, removing that same amount, even if you activate only one track for editing. So if I just have my A1 track selected and I start performing top and tail edits, let's move my position indicator somewhere and I remove the top here, we can see it still removes from the video. I'm going to hit Command Z. I'm going to do that again just so you can see it. Top removed. It still removes even though I have this track deselected. So that's the power of those sync locks. Perfect. Moving on. But what if you use the top and tail with multiple tracks selected that contain cuts at different times? So in that kind of scenario, both top and tail references active tracks and remove everything up to the next column edit point. That is the next straight cut on all active tracks. That's why you'll use this feature early in the editing process on a sequence filled with straight cuts. So we've got a bunch of straight cuts, and Avid in their exercises they typically use those straight cuts. But if you've got a bunch of different tracks running, just be aware that it's going to be looking for that next straight cut, and it's going to chop off way in advance. It might destroy your L cuts and your J cuts, depending if you have a top or a tail that you're actually performing. In the more complex sequences shown in this image, I'm going to pull that up now. The top one is what it would look like if we tried to perform a tail edit. Because there's no straight cuts till the end of this sequence, it literally removed everything from the timeline, and this was the result in the end. So if you've got those more complex timelines, keep your eye open, wide open. Thankfully, Media Composer offers a solution, so if this ends up happening to you, make sure that you implement that solution. Let's look at it now. So if you hold the Alt or Option on Mac when performing a top or tail edit, Media Composer removes only the frames up to the end point on V1, plus all tracks active. The tail function removes filter frames and keeps all downstream material in sync. what did that say? What did that just mean? So if I had a bunch of stuff that was completely out of sync, what I could do is hold the Alt or Option key on my keyboard, and then when I perform that top or tail function, it's only going to snap to the next available clip on my V1. So that's a very useful feature. In summary, ideally you'll use the top and tail on rough cut sequences with straight cuts and few tracks. If you do need to reference the next edit point on any active track, remember to hold that Alt or Option key before you press the top or tail key or button that you mapped on your keyboard or on your interface. Media Composer will use extract frames up to the next edit point again on any active track. Okay, once you cut down a storyboard at its content, you might want to quickly refine the timing on your cuts. Sorry, I had to start over here. Everything was just too confusing. I wanted to break it down to a little bit easier of somewhere we can work. And we're gonna fix the timing of our cuts now with the extend function. You can obviously use the trim mode or the dual roller trim or override a ripple trim depending on what you need to do. But there is a quick function that we can do, and that's called the extend function. So the extend function lets you bypass the trim mode to perform a dual roller trim. So it fits nicely into the quick edit workflow covered in this lesson. After you perform a storyboard edit to using top and tail to cut down our sequence, we might find that we'd like a shot change to occur earlier or later in time, and you might know exactly where. But when you enter trim mode, the position jumps to the edit point. So if we enter trim mode with U, it's going to jump to the edit point instead of where we actually want to put it using our position indicator. So as you might have guessed, we can use the extend function to solve that problem of it snapping to the nearest edit point. We can park the position indicator at the desired point that we want the cut to occur. We can make sure that our proper tracks are selected, containing the content that we actually want to extend, and then we can set an in or an out. We're going to mark an in if we want to roll the edit point back in time to the position indicated with our position indicator, our playhead. So if I want, so we can see he's walking, but there's about 6 or 7 feet of pole behind him. Let's say I wanted to use more of this shot at the beginning because there is more shot. I can move this back exactly how far I think I need to, and then I can use that extend function. We're going to press the extend button on our keyboard that we mapped or on our palette, and of course we don't have space on our palette, and of course Avid Media Composer goes, use the button that you mapped, but doesn't show you how to map the button. So let me show you. Command 3, and then in the trim mode, the trim tab of our command palette, again making sure button to button reassignment is selected. We could either map this button to our keyboard if we had the keyboard palette open, or we could just drag it to our toolbar. My toolbar is rather filled up right now, so what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to move my transition manipulation tool a little bit farther down in the timeline, and I'm going to add my extend button right here next to my trim mode button because I feel like that makes sense. Cool. So now I got my extend button just adjacent. Again, I have my position indicator marked where I want, the proper track selected that I want to use, and then all I have to do is hit my extend, and boom, it's going to say too few marks because I forgot to set my in. If I put my in, my position indicator, now it's going to snap that, it's going to roll that back. So if I hit extend, now we can see it rolls out that shot, and now he's going to be a little bit farther back in this walking bit here. Okay, awesome. All right, let's do the transverse now. Let's do the tail. So if I come to the end of the shot, we can see he's walking, and it's going to pan down to his feet, but it cuts before we get there. First, we're going to clear our marks in the timeline because I have an in, and that's going to affect my extend. So I'll hit G, and we're going to move the position indicator to where we think that proper extend is going to work. Then I can set out on my keyboard and then press the extend button that I have mapped to my keyboard or on my palette. I'm going to hit extend. It's going to extend that shot. So now we can see his feet. So this shot has been extended, and we can see his feet, and then it cuts to the next one. Perfect. All right, you can also use the extend to create split edits in narrative scenes or interviews. We'll explore this more in lesson 6. Moving swiftly on to creating a string out sequence. A string out is a compilation of clips or subclips laid out in a sequence in the same order as they appear in a bin. This saves time. How does this save time? Well, if we're organizing our bins in an order, so I went ahead and I made a bin, and I labeled it string out. All of these are subclips that I've taken that I've created from other clips from the Tennessee parkour footage bin here. And I've got all of these arranged. I know that I want to use these for my string out sequence, and I'm going to keep moving on how to create that string out sequence. We can use the sequences like a string out as source material. So you'll do this during lesson 5 later, but instead of loading each clip into the source monitor one at a time, we would just load the string out sequence and then scrub through all the clips. So I've got all these clips that I'd like to use for and subclips that I've created, rather than setting in and outs, or I could just have them. I could pick which shots that I wanted to use, and I could even use a column or a custom column to order them. So I've got this order column that I've created. I created this off camera, obviously, and then I've numbered them, and I want them to be in this order that they appear. Additionally, I could, if I had a bunch of different clips in between, I could select which specific clips I wanted by holding Command or Control, and I could do it that way when I do end up adding it to my timeline. But for now, I've got this order. I am going to use all these clips, and if I wanted it to be in the order that I've established here with my numbering system, I could right-click, and I could do Sort Ascending, and then it's going to reorder them in that format. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all lined up nicely, exactly how I would want them before I add them to my sequence. In many post-production facilities, the assistant editor creates a string out of each dailies bin or each scenes bin. Plus, new editors can use this technique when editing footage shot on a file-based camera system. So, how do you control the order of clips? Again, we could use my own custom column, or we could be sorting the bin by really anything we want. If we wanted to do it by duration, if we had in and out mark sets, start times, if we had really anything specific that we wanted to organize this bin by, we could do it that way. Now we're going to double click the column heading. We could double click the column heading to sort by whatever we want, scene, take, quality, like I just said. Optionally, if we need to include an entire clip in a string out, we could select all the clips by hitting Command A. So in this instance, I got them in the proper order that I want. I'm going to select one clip, or I can select no clip, and I hit Command A or Control A. That's going to select all the clips in my bin. With the sequence bin active, though, we're going to want to create a new sequence before we make our string out. So we can go to our sequence bin, we can hit Command N, and that's going to create a new sequence. Sorry, Command Shift N, or Shift Command N. That'll make a new sequence, and we'll call this our string out. So now we got our string out sequence. When I double click it, I'm going to load it into the timeline. I'm going to move back to my string out bin, making sure that all my clips are still selected. And again, I could select specific clips if I wanted by holding Control, or I could shift click all of them. But now what we're going to do is simply drag it to my timeline, and it's going to populate the timeline with all those subclips that I've selected. So very nice. Now some of these clips don't have audio. A lot of the clips in this parkour montage don't have audio because it was meant to be created over a soundtrack, but a few do. I just got unlucky and put a bunch at the beginning. But that's fine. So is life. So which is which? Depending on what segment of the industry you work in, terms like string out can vary. For example, broadcast news and many TV production use string out to describe the series of source clips laid out in a sequence. The film industry often refers to this type of sequence as a KEM reel, named after the flatbed film editing machine. Typically, the KEM reel contains, or we could call it KEM, contains all related items. For example, all the characters' close-ups in a scene or setup, all the wide shots from a scene or setup, or all the inserts, and so on. Note that our use of the term string out in this course isn't an assembly edit. The scene's first rough cut. It's the scene's first rough cut according to the script. The lead assistant often builds an assembly edit to save the editor time. However, some industry circles use the term string out and assembly edit interchangeably. So that's a quick thing to note there if you're working with in different fields of editing. All right, let's move into the last thing we're going to do for this lesson, and that's adding timecode burn-in. Depending on the string out sequence intended purpose, you might need to add a timecode burn-in that displays the source timecode in the sequence. Adding a timecode overlay to the dailies lets the producer and the director make notes about their favorite takes, so they have reference in comparison to the whole timeline as to where they want to make edits, if they're not at the command and they're not adding marks. Some old school directors and producers might want to take physical notes and then pass those notes on to editors. So we're going to add that time code burn in so we can see the scene's time code so they can make those notes. Since scenes are often patched together from several takes, timecode notes can help determine what pieces to use. So you might note that maybe this shot doesn't work as well as another shot, and a director, producer, or you as an editor could make note of that. So as you may recall from the MC110 course, Media Composer lets you apply video effects to filler. Here you can use that technique to quickly apply that timecode burn-in, which is a generator in the generator category of the effects palette, by the way, to the entire sequence. So let's make a new track, and if we hit Command Y or Control Y on our keyboard, that's going to automatically add a new track, and this whole track is going to contain filler. So let's go ahead and we're going to head over to the effects palette, and then in the generator category, we can find the timecode burn-in. All I have to do now is drag this to our filler and our timeline, and then drop it, and it's going to automatically add that there. Now if we park the position indicator on this shot and then we hit the effects mode button, it's going to pull up the effects editor for us, and then we can make changes to this timecode burn-in. But once we apply, we can customize the timecode burn-in effect, and we can use the clip's name and source and timecode. With that, we've reached the end of this lesson, but let's dig a little bit more into this timecode thing first. So we've got timecode. We can do source timecode, edge timecode. We've got all kinds of different options that we can set. We can even do frames, other counters, but right now it's set that the timecode display is based on track, so we're going to leave it like that. And if I hit the close button here, okay, but we can't see it. Why can't we see that timecode burn-in that we just added? Well, I'm going to give you a second. Look at Media Composer. What are we missing as far as our ability to see this? If you answered this little guy here, you would be 100% correct. Now that we click this, again, Media Composer is always looking at things from the top down. With this selected, we can see that timecode burn-in. Media Composer ends the lesson here, but I want to do a little bit more. If we hit the effect mode button, that opens our effect editor, and we can see the different settings for our timecode. We've got different displays. We've got timecode display, it's set to track. We have timecode, current track, clip notes. We can customize this any way we want. We can add additional displays as well. And as we click this, you can see over there on the right, we can see that extra timecode getting added. We could pick custom start times. We could pick whether it's starting off specific tracks, whatever it may be. So that's just a little bit more there, a little bonus. Cool. So now we got our nice little time code, and as it scrubs through, we can see that it clicks away while our shots play. And with that, we've reached the end of today's lesson. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned something today. Don't forget to get into Avid Media Composer, start playing with these functions and features. This lesson was chunky boy thick. It's got tons of very important editing techniques, and so make sure you're practicing with them. Make sure you're mapping these functions to the keyboard too. These top and tail and these extend edits, they're going to be super helpful. Ideally, you would map these to your keyboard. I did map them here to my timeline palette, but I would recommend, again, mapping them to your keyboard so that you're able to perform these functions much faster. If I could move my little position indicator here and then, quickly on my keyboard smack the, top button rather than having to come up here and click, that's going to make my editing process so much faster. So, yeah, keep all that in mind. Stay in school. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did and you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. To my students, I will see you in class. Bye-bye.